Hi, I'm Laura LOK, and this is my presentation for our Discussion Leader assignment. This presentation is going to discuss self-management strategies and how they can help individuals become more independent. This chapter was in the Cooper book and gives a clear definition of self-management. It discusses the applications and benefits used. It discusses self-management tactics, and it also gives guidelines to give a clear picture of what a successful plan would look like. So with that overview, let's get started. So what is self-management? It's basically a method where learners are taught to monitor and collect data of their own behaviors. It's a great tool for learners to use because it provides independence for the learner in a small way. Self-management can be involved in any program as long as the learner is performing or controlling the elements of the program that changes their behavior. We often use the words self-management and self-control interchangeably, but the Cooper book clearly defines the two terms. Self-management is suggested as the term to reference a person behaving in a way in order to change their behavior. While self-control suggests that the ultimate control is within the person, but the causal factors are in the person's experiences with the environment. When you think of self-control, you also think about the ability to delay gratification instead of acting immediately on something. You're using self-control when you see that piece of chocolate cake that you really want, but decide it's in your best interest not to eat it. You're using self-management when you change your environment by not having the chocolate cake in your house so that you don't have to worry about eating it. Skinner suggests that there was a two-response phenomenon when discussing self-control. There is the controlling response, which affects the way the variable changes the controlled response. And that controlled response is the target behavior that's being changed. The book gave some good examples of each. So a controlling response could be walking for 30 minutes each evening, while the controlling response would be to make a chart and hold yourself accountable to a colleague for that walk. Another example would be saving money instead of spending it as the controlled response, while enrolling in some type of pay reduction plan is considered the self-management behavior or the controlling response. This slide breaks down the applications of self-management into four main uses. First is living a more effective and efficient day-to-day life. We actually do some self-management each day without even realizing it. We write a grocery list when we go to the store to keep track of what to buy. We create to-do lists when we have projects to work on. And by doing that, we're making things more efficient around the house. Next, we use self-management to break bad habits and create good ones. Bad habits are often created because we fall into what they call reinforcement traps. The book defines these traps as immediate or smaller consequences that influence our behavior more than the bigger delayed outcomes. So even though we know it would be beneficial to start our research paper a month before it's due, we procrastinate because the reinforcement of having other things pop up in our life is more enticing to us. Then we pay for it by having to write the paper in just a few days' time. Good thing I've never done that. By contrast, self-management can also allow us to accomplish difficult tasks. By achieving small tasks, they will gradually bring you closer to the cumulative outcome of the bigger goal. Continuing with the research paper example, if we are capable of writing one more sentence, it brings us closer to the overall goal of finishing the paper. And then finally, self-management helps us to achieve our personal goals. If you think about it, learning how to play the piano could be an example of self-management. If you practice how to read music and how to play chords for 20 minutes each day, you'll be able to play a song. If you fail to practice for 20 minutes, then you could impose some kind of fine to increase your willingness to practice. This slide will go over the advantages and benefits of self-management program. There are many advantages that are discussed in the book, and I'll highlight a couple of them with this slide. One point that I liked was that People with really diverse disabilities can still learn self-management skills. This creates independence in certain aspects of their life and allows the student to be an active participant in their behavior program. Children can learn to self-monitor themselves in a number of areas like alertness, activity level, concentration, in addition to problem behaviors. They can reflect on their data and see how their behavior comes across to others. The other point I'd like to highlight is that self-management skills allows the person or the student to contribute more to their environment. Students can feel useful if they feel like they are contributing to their environment. There was a good example in the Cooper book about this where in a classroom, grading all of the work took a considerable amount of time for the teacher. And if the students were able to learn to self-score their work and provide their own feedback by using either the answer key or another self-check method, then the teacher would be freed up to attend to other aspects of teaching, and the students would actually be contributing to their learning. So it's a win for everyone. And then further down in that reading, it gave a specific example of doing this scenario. And when the teacher graded math papers, it required an average of 50.5 minutes to do that. But when the students scored their own papers, the teacher time needed was reduced to an average of 33.4 minutes. So it was pretty neat to have such an effect. Next, we're going to touch base on two antecedent-based self-management tactics. In this type of tactic, the main feature is the manipulation of events or the antecedent to the target behavior or the controlled behavior. This can also be thought of as environmental planning. So you see this list of tactics that are available. One that I'll note is the first one, which is manipulating motivating operations to make a desired or undesired behavior more or less likely. The way that the MO is worked into self-management is that your controlling behavior creates motivation that would increase or decrease the frequency of your target behavior. So that's a lot of words to say, but the basic example is if I eat a large meal before I go to the grocery store, I'm less likely to buy a lot of ready-to-eat, high-fat foods like chips or cookies. Whereas if I went to the store hungry, I might be more likely to buy the high-fat foods to satisfy my hunger. So my antecedent changed what I did at the store. What is self-monitoring and how is it different than self-management? So self-monitoring is a strategy of the overall self-management umbrella. So it's a tactic where the person observes his or her own behavior and records the occurrence or the non-occurrence of the behavior. Often, it could be a tally system for how many times you've done something or some kind of log of what you ate for each meal that day, for example. It was originally used to collect data on behaviors only the client could observe, like nail biting or smoking. Now, it's an effective intervention because of the reactive effects it generates. The reactivity, which is the effect on the person's behavior because of an assessment or measurement collection procedure, often goes down during self-management because outside systems create an uncontrolled variability to the measurement. So when a researcher is collecting data, that reactivity factor needs to be as low as possible. So why does self-monitoring work? It's an effective process that can change behavior even though there are often aspects that are private that contribute to other variables that affect it. It is effective because it can be taught to children and can be combined with goal setting and self-evaluation. So this video is pretty cool that I found on YouTube of how an elementary school class uses self-monitoring on a daily basis and the changes the teacher saw in those students. So I'm going to play that for you right now.
Okay, so boys and girls, let's go ahead and take out our trackers. Got your pencils? We're going to go ahead and do our morning inventory. So let's turn to the first page. Something I think my students have gotten a lot from has been the requirement for them to stop and think about themselves. How am I doing? Did I sleep? What did I have for breakfast? It's something that really everyone should do to improve themselves. there has been an impact on their level of engagement academically during class because they're responsible to themselves with their self-evaluation. They had to be aware that soon they're going to track themselves. In the end of this math class, I'm going to be marking down how I'm doing. I think what's beautiful about it is it does help the kids accept and feel comfortable with the fact that they're learners. They're not expected to be perfect walking in the door. It isn't a performance. It's learning and practice and growing and trying it again and practicing it again and repeating positive practice.
Something I learned was I got more self-confidence in myself, and I've been going to bed earlier.
I learned that nobody's born being good at something, and if you practice enough, you can be as good as other people.
The thing about the tracker system is that it can be very empowering on a personal level for each student. It's their own tracking of their own behavior. They feel a safety knowing there's no competition or scoring or anything like that. And with that knowledge comes an empowerment, I'm in charge of myself. I can make choices and I can improve my life. And that's huge.
So now I'd like to talk about self-monitoring guidelines. When beginning a self-monitoring program to students, there are suggested guidelines to present it. First, having materials that make the monitoring easier is important. So having record forms, tally sheets, timers, counters, whatever is needed to make it easier on the individual is best. Next, providing cues and prompts are necessary, especially in the beginning. Prompts can be visual, auditory, whatever works for that situation. An example in the book was having a visual cue on the whiteboard for kindergarten students to remind them to record their productivity during their seat work. Next, you'll see that self-monitoring can be a trial and error event. It's important to make sure the right part of the targeted behavior is being self-monitored. You want to make sure that it's the part where the achieved change is moving towards the desired overall goal. And when self-monitoring, you want to self-record often, especially in the beginning of the behavior change. And it needs to be accurate or it's not effective. In order to have increased desired behavior, Cooper suggests guidelines for self-administering consequences. So first, choose small, easy-to-deliver consequences. It's actually a common mistake to make the consequences too large, the thinking being that if I make this reward so great, I'll be sure to accomplish that goal, but that often fails. Smaller rewards throughout that are easy to obtain work better. Second, setting meaningful, easy-to-meet criteria for reinforcement. So you don't want to make the criteria so low that it's too easy to meet the goal, but at the same time, too high of expectations result in mistakes and frustration and make it harder to achieve reinforcement. Third, eliminate other reinforcements. The book refers to bootleg reinforcement, which is access to a reward or something of equal reinforcement without meeting the requirements of the contingency. So if you get rewards on the sly, you're not going to work as hard. Fourth, put someone else in control of handling out consequences. So putting someone else in control of the consequences allows for a rational consideration when giving out reinforcements. If it's hard to rationalize the type of consequence you should receive or don't have the follow-through to deliver, then get someone to help you that can just implement that part of your behavior change. And number 5, use least complicated and intrusive contingencies. So keep it simple. The self-management process does not have to be complicated, so simple is best. So an effective program follows 6 steps. First, specify the goal and define the behavior. So you can't do anything without an objective in mind. Second, begin self-monitoring the behavior. Self-monitoring as soon as the target behavior is defined is important before implementing a type of intervention because you're getting your baseline data at that point. You'll get a lot of information from this and it makes the person more aware of the events that are occurring that are leading up to that behavior. Third, create contingencies that will compete with the natural contingencies. So it's kind of like adding another step, but it's a very important step. Cooper gives the example of a smoker that self-records and reports on each cigarette they smoke to his partner, who provides praise, rewards, and penalties. That immediate consequence from the self-management partner creates more effective consequences than just the natural environment of contingencies, which would include like your threat of cancer will go down or something that's not so tangible for him. Fourth, go public with the commitment to change the behavior. Sharing your goals with others make you more accountable, and it creates contingencies for successes and non-successes. Get a self-management partner, someone who can give feedback about how the project is going and if it's effective. It's someone to share data with and be a cheering section for the individual. And sixth, continually evaluate and redesign as needed. It's not set in stone. It's important to be guided by the data. If the trend line is not going the right direction, then find a way to tweak the program. And finally, with so many opportunities and tactics for self-management, the bottom line is behavior changes behavior. If you follow the 3 M's of modify your environment, monitor your behaviors, and make commitments, then behavior change is possible. So that brings me to the end of my discussion. Thanks for listening.